Welcome back to the podcast. I am Amanda Werner, and I am the host of the Empower Students Now podcast. Today, I am going to talk about 5 very damaging myths about autism and the truth behind these myths. I think it's really important for teachers to be knowledgeable about autism and ADHD because there are lots and lots of kids walking around schools that are not diagnosed, and I think that it's important for you to be aware of these myths so that you don't perpetuate them. Let's get started. Welcome to the Empower Students Now podcast, a podcast about equity, neurodiversity, mindfulness, and student engagement. There's a lot that needs to change in our education system. The good news is teachers have the power to make these changes now. All right, to start off, I just want to mention, if you haven't heard my other episodes, that I am an autistic person myself. I was diagnosed recently, last year, and I also have ADHD. I'm AuDHD, and that is a special combination that creates a special kind of person. And I'm a unique person, and I am many more things beyond autistic and ADHD. I have a personality. I have a culture. I have a society that that impacts me. I have all sorts of other characteristics beyond these labels. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you are aware of that. And yeah, I think that one of the reasons that I chose teaching as a career is because of autism. I have always been very uncomfortable with people my age, adults. And so, like, working with kids is where I'm most comfortable because I could be goofy and I could say things that, like, are real and true. Like, kids to me they can't help but be themselves. I mean, that starts to change as they grow older and they want to, like, start kind of being cool and conforming to, like, trends and things. And that definitely starts to happen, in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. But I do think that even those kids, their personalities, their quirks, they can't help but be themselves, right? Even though they might be trying really, really hard to be cool. And so I really thrive in environments where I can be myself and where I can have a sense of humor and I can sort of control the environment. And I think that all of these things about teaching were what drew me to the profession in the first place. And the hardest part about being a teacher and not knowing that I was autistic and ADHD was all of this stuff that involved things outside of the classroom, like going to staff meetings, going to collaboration PLC meetings. Those were the hardest parts of teaching for me, the bureaucratic stuff. I had a really hard time with sitting in a room full of adults and feeling suppressed. Like, I had to suppress my strong opinions, my strong feelings. And that's really hard. That's a hard thing to do, to constantly have to sort of pretend like you're someone else. And usually I was pretending, that I was the most nice, teacher in the building and, like, the most helpful and the most, right? Like the goody two shoes teacher, the teacher that volunteered to, like, do the professional development because no one else would host it, right? Like, I don't know. I did a lot. I went above and beyond. Um, and it was really uncomfortable. Just communicating with colleagues. It was really hard. So this is an episode about the myths, right? So like, I feel like I'm already debunking a myth that autistic people, here's the first one. Autistic people don't feel emotions or don't care about others. That they're cold, that they're unfeeling, that they lack empathy, that they don't care if they hurt someone else's feelings, that they can't form deep relationships. None of this is true. None of this is true. Autistic people often feel emotions more intensely, not less. And often when a kid is, or an adult is having a meltdown, that's why, right? That they're experiencing the world, and they're having a sensory overload. They're having an overload of like especially in schools where kids are surrounded by humans. It can feel really, really intense to be surrounded by all these different emotions and people and feelings, right? The difference is in how I think that autistic people express their emotions and how they might read others' emotions. Sometimes they have overwhelming empathy for all sorts of things. Just one moment. So, like for me, having empathy for my colleagues and adults was really hard. Like, I just couldn't see other people's points of view very well. And I often just felt confused about other people's motives. And I felt really sort of angry a lot in like meetings and things, and just felt anger about like that we were just checking boxes in these meetings and not actually helping kids. And for me, kids, it is so easy for me to feel empathy for children, especially children who are misunderstood. And that's actually really common. Autistic people have very strong sensitivities around injustices and unfairnesses. And I believe that kids are, well, I know, I mean, this is a fact. Kids are so vulnerable. They're so powerless. They're so reliant on the adults around them. And so for me, I have very, very high empathy for children. And so, of course, I went into teaching because I have so much empathy for them and understanding, right? And just feeling like I want to be there to support them because they're so vulnerable. Okay, so, and a lot of autistic people have a lot of empathy for like characters in movies and shows, animals, their friends, right? But then maybe are just totally blind to someone else's perspective, like in the classroom, like maybe just another classmate, right? Like it might be harder for them to feel empathy for that, for those other people or circumstances. Okay, so I do think this myth can be really, really harmful, like just thinking that autistic people are uncaring or can't feel emotions, and just knowing that if you assume that someone lacks empathy, that they lack care, or that they're cold, and you label that, it can be really damaging because you view that person through that lens. You might treat them in a more negative manner, you know, like a more judgmental manner, in a manner of like, I need to fix them. I need to get them to understand. I need to lecture them. So it can be really damaging. And I think it's also important to note that autistic people often have like flat affect where they don't have very many facial expressions, but that does not mean that they don't have feelings. They definitely have feelings. Okay, people, please can you just remember that? They care deeply. And just because they're not making eye contact the right way, like, it doesn't mean that they're not paying attention to you or they don't care. It just doesn't mean that. So just be aware of this myth. Okay, here's another really damaging myth. All autistic people are the same, and you can spot autism easily. So people think that autism looks one specific way, or that it's obvious that if a student makes eye contact with you and can have a conversation, that they're not autistic, or that girls can't be autistic, or that it's rare. These are all myths, and they're not true. The truth is that autistic people are very unique. And there's this saying in the autism community that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. It's a spectrum. It's not a linear scale from mild to severe. It's not that. I actually don't really like the terms high functioning and low functioning because they box people in, and I just think that it's more complex than that. I would rather say that every autistic person has different challenges and different strengths. And some of those challenges may be more severe or more mild, right? Like, it's not that your autism is more severe or more mild. It's the challenge that might be more severe or mild. Okay, another truth that goes with this myth is that autistic people mask. So they might not seem autistic because they're high masking. And this is especially true in girls and women. And like the classic autism presentation is actually, and the DSM-5 is based on studies of white boys. So that is really important to know. I think that one of the reasons that I wasn't diagnosed sooner is because of masking and people pleasing and wanting desperately to fit in and trying really, really hard to fit in. And so I think many people didn't see my autism because of that, because I was doing such a good job pretending to be normal. So the reason that this myth is very harmful, and the myth again is all autistic people are the same, or that it's easy to identify autism, is that we would only identify and support the kids who fit the stereotype. And that high masking kids, they suffer in silence because they don't, quote unquote, look autistic. And people are dismissive, teachers and parents. And if a kid is doing fine in school, then there's nothing wrong. And I did fine in school, and there was a lot wrong. I mentioned in another episode how much trouble I got into as a kid, and how much trouble I caused my family and my parents. And I mean, they almost got a divorce because of my behavior. And yet everything was fine because they're doing fine in school. And I wasn't always doing fine in school, by the way. I did get F's and D's at times throughout middle, high, and college. So yeah, there's that. So it's just thinking that you can identify autism in people easily it's not a good myth. So the student who seems fine might be using all their energy to appear fine at school, and then have a burnout or a shutdown later at home, which is what my experience was. Eye contact, conversation skills, and academic success don't rule out autism. So some things to watch for in your students is just exhaustion, selective mutism, meltdowns at home, students who are only interested in certain subject areas, and it's very intense. The intensity of it is very high, and just sensory sensitivities. And one of these things doesn't equal autism. It has to be a whole host of things to get a diagnosis. That's important too. Okay. Myth number 3, autistic people lack intelligence, that they have low IQs or they can't learn academically. And there's a counter to this myth too. There's another myth that's the opposite, which is that autistic people are gifted and highly intelligent or have some sort of superpower or super ability, right? So there's like this counter myth too that goes with this one. So the myth is that either autism equals intellectual disability or autism equals giftedness. And I mean, both of these things can occur. It's not that they're not like, they don't happen, because there are co-occurrences with autism. It's just you can't, some autistic people are not gifted, and some autistic people do not have an intellectual disability. Some autistic people just have average intelligence and don't have any superpowers, right? Like, so you got to remember that. So another myth that kind of matches this one too about lack of intelligence is that if an autistic person is nonverbal, that they're not intelligent. And that is so untrue, because you can have an autistic person who is not, I like the word non-speaking, because they can verbalize through tools like typing tools and things, right? Like there are other ways that they can communicate, and they can also be gifted if they're non-speaking. So just remembering all of this and keeping these things in mind is so important. So the truth is that autism and intelligence are completely separate things. Autistic people span the full range of intellectual ability, like I was saying earlier. And autistic people, they can be gifted in specific areas, but not necessarily qualify for the giftedness, like diagnosis, because of, their IQ being so high. So, and communication differences don't reflect cognitive ability. There are certain areas that I really struggled with in school, such as math and science, and just any subject that required that I had to know a lot of vocabulary and to remember it. I also did terrible on standardized assessments. My SAT score was awful. I was actually in the advanced English classes in high school, and I remember my senior year, the advanced English teacher telling us that if we did not score 1,000 or more on the SAT, that we were not going to go to college, that we weren't going to get into college. And I just remember that day so vividly, because I had to hold back tears because I got a 960 on my SAT, and I took it more than once. And I remember going to the bathroom and just crying so hard because she said that. And I did end up going to college. So, haha, and doing pretty well, right? Like, if it's an area of interest for me, I will do well. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. And this myth can be really, really harmful to autistic people for for the reason I just said, right? Like, because just because I was in an advanced class didn't mean I didn't have challenges. Like, for example, on standardized tests, like just because you're in an advanced class, like they just assume that I could do well on standardized tests. Also, autistic students can get tracked into lower level classes that they don't need. teachers dumb down content unnecessarily. They can say insensitive things unnecessarily, like what my experience was. And then students internalize, I did the message that I wasn't smart. I definitely internalized that. And we just rob them of the challenge and opportunity to grow and learn and feel confident in ourselves. So, what you need to know about this myth is that you need to always presume competence. Just presume that the kid is competent and can do the thing until they show you otherwise, and then you support them, right? An autistic student might struggle with executive function, but might also excel in other areas, like maybe, I don't know, math or just like analytical writing. And it can really be confusing because, and that's where this word twice exceptional comes in. I love that word or that phrase. You're exceptional in multiple ways. And one of those ways might be your autism, right? Like twice exceptional means that you are off the charts in like norm reference tests, like everyone falls in the middle and is average, and you fall outside of the average and in like maybe in one strength, and then in like the ways that you're challenged. So another thing that you need to know is that you might need to have accommodations about how a student accesses learning, but not what they learn. Like you can still give autistic people challenging content. Okay. Myth number 4. So we have 2 more myths to go over. Myth number 4, autistic people need to be fixed or made more normal. And there is a type of therapy that's very like, it's the therapy that autistic, if you're diagnosed with autism as a kid, it's very much pushed upon parents and kids once they get a diagnosis. It's called ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. And that, we did try that for a little while, my family, and it didn't work for us. It has, I think, helped some people. But I think that there's a lot of autistic people that are super against it because it's all about fixing these behaviors like stimming or demanding appropriate behavior, right? Like making eye contact or saying hello, saying goodbye, making small talk. Like it's basically, ABA is very behaviorist, where you reward behaviors you want and you ignore behaviors you don't want. And it is very reward, like Pavlov dogs kind of behaviorist perspective, ABA is. And just this whole idea that autism is something that you can like cure or overcome or grow out of if you just work hard enough to conform. And the truth is that autism is a neurological difference that will never go away. It will always be there. It's not a disease that you can cure. Stimming is actually a form of regulating and calming yourself. It's not misbehavior. And stimming is like repetitive activities, such as like playing with a fidget toy as an example, or flipping a pen. Skin picking can be a form of stimming. It's actually, that is something that I have engaged in during various parts of my life. When I was in college, I did a lot of skin picking, and it is sort of damaging. So some stimming can be physically damaging to the autistic person. And so this is getting into like sort of hard area, because if the skin picking is calming, um, it's hard to stop. And stopping stimming behavior can actually make things worse for the autistic person, um, because it makes them want to do it more. And I could have a whole other episode about stimming, but I'm going to stop there. But like, just forcing, um, these things on autistic people can be really, really damaging to them mentally and to their self-esteem. Um, so it is not something that we can fix. It's The goal should be, and this is what we need to know as teachers, that the goal is to support autistic people to thrive as them, not to make them be something they're not. So just allowing kids to STEM as long as it's not harmful, um, in school. I should do an episode on skin picking. I have a lot to say about this, but I'll stop. Okay. Don't force eye contact. Let students look away if they want to. Don't just assume they're not listening because they're looking away, because they probably are listening, and looking away is helping them focus. Accept different ways of communicating and just being in the world. Like, if someone doesn't say goodbye to you or say hello to you, it doesn't mean they're being rude. It just means, it's a small talk, and this kind of like social conformity is not easy for them. Um, the goal is not to erase who they are. The goal is just to help them navigate their challenges in the world. Okay, let's do the last myth. Myth number 5: autistic people don't want friends or prefer to be alone. This is a myth. This is not true. Autistic people are not natural loners. They can feel lonely, right? They can want to socialize. They want connection. They do. But they also might be, they might need less than others. Like, just like there's introverts and extroverts in the world, autistic people can also be introverted, more introverted, or less introverted, extroverted, right? Um, so they just prefer different types or different amounts of socializing. And then, like, socializing, because it's more difficult, it's just harder, right? And so, like, it's harder for an autistic person to communicate with someone who might be neurotypical and is totally comfortable with small talk. They might not desire that small talk as much. They might want to talk about their interests more. And that doesn't mean they're selfish. It just means that's just a different way of being. Uh, and the truth is that because of all of this, because the world was designed for neurotypical people, loneliness, depression are really, really common in autistic people because of that lack of connection. And so I think that I've mentioned in another episode about how hard it was for me as a kid growing up. Um, I was never part of a group of friends. Like, I always had a really hard time with groups. I could only really have one friend. Um, and that's really hard, because if the friendship ends, you're left with no one. And this happened to me over and over again. And it can be really, really hard and lonely. Um, so I think that assuming that autistic people don't want to socialize, it can be really harmful to autistic people, because it can kind of make you assume that they just want to be alone when maybe they probably don't. It might make you not include them as much. They might be forgotten in a classroom, left behind, uh, ostracized by peers and even by the teacher. And then they sort of grow up feeling like there's something wrong with them. And that's really sad. Um, so what teachers need to do and know about this myth is that it is important for you to check in on those kids that are more introverted or shy. You could ask them questions like, hey, do you want a partner? Or or maybe ask them privately, are you interested in making more friends? And like maybe point them in certain directions, certain clubs and programs your school might offer. Things like that. You might facilitate structured social opportunities around shared interest and clear roles. Uh, I also think it's so valuable to teach all students about different communication styles and to talk about how a lot of times being extroverted is rewarded in our society, and how can we be normalize introversion more and like be more accepting of shyness, and even upholding shyness as a good thing. Like some people who are more shy and introverted are often really, really great listeners. And so just, talking about those different communication styles with students. And then also realizing that there's this phenomenon or this term called parallel play, which is really common in autistic friendships, where two autistic people will be doing two different things, but they're in the same room and they're not, maybe one's playing Dragon Adventures on Roblox and the other one's drawing. And they're not talking, they're just doing two different things. That can be a form of connection. And that can feel very, very good and connected. And it's just a different way of socializing. Okay, so the pattern across all of these myths, let's just wrap this up. The pattern is, between all of these myths, 5 myths I've talked about, is that people assume that neurotypical behavior is right and autistic behavior is wrong. And this causes harm because it's causing a misunderstanding about the autistic experience. And it leads to prioritizing fixing and interventions to, quote unquote, help the autistic person, when really it's diminishing their individuality and their neurodivergence. So we need to shift from fixing to just supporting, from assuming to asking with true curiosity about a person's experience, and shift from forcing conformity to celebrating differences. I hope this episode has helped you. I hope that it helps your students. That's the goal. If you found this helpful, as always, please share it with someone you know, or someone's you know. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.